Hello, my name is Jason Toohey. I am the Communications Creative and Media intern here at Chestnut Grove Baptist Church. Today, we will be going over our child protection class policies. These are policies that our church has put in place to protect both the leaders and volunteers of the church, as well as the children that we seek to serve. Just a quick reminder that you can always get the most up-to-date child protection policy handbook from the church office. It's important to make sure that we are constantly using the most up-to-date information we can. Also, very quickly, I would like to remind you of our mission statement here at Chestnut Grove, making disciples to share God's love in all the world. I think it's important that we remember it is our job as leaders and volunteers to make disciples of these children, and that starts by giving them a safe place to learn and worship Christ. Just really quickly, I'd like to remind you of two pieces of scripture that I think are important when discussing this serious issue. The first being Matthew 19:14, which reads, Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of heaven." Below that, we have Colossians 3:21. Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. Remember, our goal here is to give students a safe place to learn about God and to worship God. And we don't want to discourage them. And that's why these policies are of utmost importance to our church. All right, to start off, we're just going to go over some statistics on child sexual abuse. This is going to take the form of true or false statements. After I read the statement, you can quickly say whether you believe it is true or false, to which I will give the answer and possibly a short statement on why it is or is not the case. To start off, child sexual abuse always involves physical contact with children. This is, of course, false. Child sexual abuse does not necessarily need to involve physical contact. Emotional contact can also leave the child feeling abused or neglected. So it's important to realize that child abuse and neglect can take on many different forms. Most child molesters are male. This is a true fact. Child molesters are usually strangers. False. It's important to remember that abuse often happens at the hands of people that these children trust. This could be church officials, school officials, parents, family friends, and hardly ever is it at the hands of a stranger. Victims of sexual abuse suffer no long-term effects. This is false. As we know, the long-term effects are very real, and these are feelings of abuse that can manifest themselves for years to come, even through the entire lifespan of the abused individual. 1 out of 5 molesters begin their activity before the age of 18. True. Only a small percentage of victims are male. False. Most churches screen workers for potential molesters. This is false. Thankfully, this is changing, and Chestnut Grove, as we discuss later, does have policies in place to try to avoid these kind of blunders. But especially in small town America, where everybody knows everybody, it's possible that these background checks are things that just don't happen. And it's important that we remember that it is our job to protect these children, including screening workers. Following the next slide here, we have church leaders cannot be held liable for child sexual abuse. This is false. They can and should be held accountable. Child sexual abuse victims have an average settlement of $1.5 million. This is true, and I would wager that the settlement amount is much higher now. A child molester who has experienced a religious conversion is no longer a threat to children. This is false. Obviously, we believe that people are capable of change, but it is still our number one duty to protect children. Child sexual abuse is a crime in all 50 states. True. A typical pedophile will commit 117 sexual Sexual crimes in their lifetime. True. Churches in the past have been very supportive of victims of child abuse. False. It's important to remember that it is our job as a church to support these children and to make them know that the behavior they're experiencing is nothing short of reprehensible. So here we have some statistics on child sexual abuse. These are no longer true or false. These are just cold, hard facts that I'm sure many of you will find disturbing. 400,000 babies born in the United States this year will become victims of child sexual abuse. 1 in 10 children will experience sexual abuse before their 18th birthday. 1 in 7 girls and 1 in 25 boys will be sexually abused before the age of 18. Only about 10% of children are sexually abused by strangers. In 2018, over 126,000 referrals were made to Georgia's child welfare agencies. It's important here to remember that these numbers are very real and they're very damning, and it's our job to minimize these statistics and to give children a safe place to learn about Christ. Here we have just some definitions about child sexual abuse. So, child sexual abuse is sexual contact or exploitation of a minor for the sexual stimulation of the perpetrator. It can be violent or nonviolent, but it is the exploitation of a child's vulnerability and powerlessness for the gain of the perpetrator. It is important here to remember that full responsibility lies on the perpetrator. It is our duty as a church to be there for children who experience this type of abuse, and it is our job to make sure that the perpetrator faces backlash for the crimes that they commit. Continuing on with the definition, we have criminal behavior that involves children and sexual behaviors for which they are not personally, socially, or developmentally ready for. When considering touching behaviors, we have things like fondling, oral, genital, and anal penetration, sexual intercourse, and forcible rape. When considering non-touching behaviors, because as stated, these are not always touching behaviors, we have verbal comments, pornographic materials, obscene phone calls or text messages, and exhibitionism. Quickly, I'd like to go ahead and drop some resources. If you believe a child is in danger or at risk, these are some resources that you can use. We have a mobile app and a phone number, as well as the website for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and we have the Sex Offender Registry. This allows you to see sex offenders that live near you. Chestnut Grove requires its members to complete 4 safety steps before they begin to work with children. This is part of Chestnut Grove's actionable plan to keeping threats away from children. Step 1 is the Child Protection Program training. That's what you're in right now. That's the PowerPoint we're going over, as well as the handbook that you are receiving. Second, we have a screening process in which church officials meet with our volunteers and workers to discuss things mentioned here. Third, we have our policies and procedures, which is again the handbook. These are plans that we've laid forward to protect our children. Again, you can always get the most up-to-date material from the church office. And fourth, we have our criminal background check, in which the church runs a background check on anybody who is going to be serving with children to make sure that we know who they are and we know their intentions. So the first step in our child protection program is training. This equips all staff members and volunteers with information necessary to recognize abuser characteristics and grooming behavior. This is required for all staff members and volunteers, and it must be renewed annually. There's a chance that you're watching this video to either be certified for the first time or to have your child protection status renewed. Renewing it is an important way that we at Chestnut Grove help keep staff members and volunteers up to date with the information of how to spot abuser characteristics and grooming behaviors. So the second step is our screening process. Staff members and volunteers are required to complete a screening process which consists of the following. Staff members must complete an employment application, and volunteers must complete a volunteer application and screening form. Both groups must complete a face-to-face interview with Chestnut Grove faculty. Both groups are also asked to provide 3 references with knowledge of suitability to work with children. Adult volunteers must attend Chestnut Grove for 6 months before serving with children. There are situations in which this clause can be overlooked. That is at the discretion of the church and is going to be issued on an as-needed basis. And then lastly, current or retired staff members of the Georgia Baptist Mission Board or Southern Baptist Convention may be allowed to serve as workers after finishing steps 1 and 3. So step 3 is our policies and procedures. Staff members and volunteers are required to review and sign the Child Protection Handbook. And step 4 is a criminal background check. All staff members and volunteers must undergo a criminal background check, and the intensity may differ depending on the position or what you're trying to do inside of the church, but we find it important that all staff members and volunteers partake in this step. Here is our number of workers required when supervising children. 2 adults must always be present. That is the minimum. But we do have a worker to child ratio that we have set forward in our Child Protection Handbook. This deals with the age of the children as well as the maximum number of children that 2 workers are able to watch at a time. For a nursery, 2 workers can watch a maximum of 8 children. For our 2 to 3-year-olds, 2 workers can watch a maximum of 12 children. For our 4 to 5-year-olds, 2 workers are able to watch 18 children. Grades K through 5 and 6 through 12 move up to 2 adults for every 20 children. Here we have the worker supervision involving minors and bathroom etiquette. So for the nursery, young children are never to be left unattended in the bathrooms. If necessary, children should be assisted in straightening their clothes before returning to the other children. Importantly, most important, the door is to remain open at all times. And also, we find it important that women are in charge of changing diapers. That is a duty that falls on women and not on the man. Men should at no time be found changing the diapers of children in the nursery. Older children should only be supervised and assisted as needed and receive the minimum amount of assistance needed. If a staff member or volunteer must check on a child, he or she should be accompanied by another worker, again, because we will always be in groups of 2. In the case that another worker is not available, he or she should knock on the exterior bathroom door and ask if the child needs help. If such need arises, the exterior door is to remain open, and the staff member or supervisor should verbally assist the child from outside of the locked bathroom stall. If necessary, children should be assisted in straightening their clothing in the presence of another staff member or volunteer before returning to other children. This slide encompasses what disciplinary action Chestnut Grove allows when handling children. Physical discipline is not accepted for any reason in any form. This includes slapping, pinching, hitting, and other physical forces as retaliation or as correction for inappropriate behaviors by children. Instead, children are to be disciplined using timeouts and other non-physical methods of behavior management. This could take the form of some of the following. Verbally redirect before intervening physically. Speak with the child away from the group while avoiding being alone with the child. Consider a timeout. Remember this simple rule: no longer than 1 minute per year of age. Uncontrollable Uncontrollable behavior should be reported immediately to the parents and program supervisors. Here is a list of some key things to remember. Remember that this list is not exhaustive and that the full handbook is. But regardless, here are some key things to try to keep in mind. Classrooms without windows must have the door opened at all times. Physical contact should be wholly for the benefit of the child, never to fulfill the emotional needs of a staff member or volunteer. Physical contact should not give even the appearance of wrongdoing. Remember to be above reproach. No staff members or volunteer is allowed to be under the influence of alcohol or illegal drugs while serving. One-on-one meetings between children and staff members or volunteers is strictly prohibited. Another staff member or volunteer or the parent and guardian must always be present. So lastly here we just have a few different things to remember when workers are supervising children. First, leaders should periodically check rooms and isolated areas. This will be in the form of designated officials walking around, checking empty rooms, making sure they're still empty, checking isolated areas, making sure there's no children or workers in them. Nursery volunteers should be sure to practice proper procedures to identify the guardianship of a person picking up a child. Youth volunteers are permitted to work with children provided they meet the following requirements. Must have finished the 7th grade, must sign a statement written by the Child Protection Program Coordinator outlining the expectations of service and conduct, must complete the Child Protection Program training course, and they must attend Chestnut Grove Baptist Church regularly. Alright guys, well that is the end of our child protection policy training today. I hope you all found it useful. Just one more reminder to always check for the most up-to-date information regarding the Child Protection Handbook with the Chestnut Grove Baptist Church office. Thank you so much.